there. Now I don't have to worry. Um, so
But
yeah.
it just made me think from all that ironing, I could have done it the hard way and been done with
Well,
this.
but you see, now you can, you can make an intelligent choice
Do
of
I do I
way.
want to stand by an iron or do I want to sew by hand?
Yeah. Well, as a rule, I tend not to block fuse,
Hmm.
but this is a different method of putting together a jacket. So, you could probably get away without block fusing, but
I decided no, I'm trying it, even
yeah,
against my will.
yeah. Well, yeah. See, and I wouldn't consider block fusing a fabric that had a really smooth finish. Because the drawback with block fusing, if you look at garments, the care labels on ready to wear garments, they will say low moisture pressing. And what they're saying is if you put any steam on this thing, that all the fusible is going to pop off and you're going to have a bubbly surface. So if you see a garment that has that, that is what they're telling you.
Right,
Because if you think about it, low moisture pressing, proper pressing needs two things: heat and it needs moisture.
right.
As a rule, there are some fabrics that you don't use the steam on, but overall, it is a two component process: heat and moisture. So when they say low moisture pressing, you just kind of go, how's that going to work out for you? Um, but now we know. So yes. So do we have any questions from last week?
No, I've
Uh,
been
uh,
catching up on your craftsy classes. I watched your
oh,
Velveteen Blazer,
okay. Well, there's
and then
been
I
a
watched
lot of
Pam
crossover.
Howard's course. So it's totally got my mind muddled now.
Yeah. Well, see, this is something that my teacher Simone recommended, and honestly, I think it's a good thing. Is she used to say, don't mix systems.
Right.
So, like for example, in pattern making, this is years and years ago. It was in a suburb of Chicago. I want to say it was Elgin, Illinois, or whatever. Anyway, the gal who hired me she had come up with a computer garment software program
Hmm.
because she started out. She is a rather large gal, and she was trying to make some of these other pattern making software things work. And this one that she was working with, when she put in her measurements, the error message came up: use human measurements. Which, what do you say to that? She said that, I just said, indeed. So she came up with, because she was thinking, yeah, I'm a computer whiz, because programming was her thing. I can do this. And so she had this software. And so the beta testers, she wanted to treat them to me coming and teaching them some tailoring. It was going to be 6 days. That was going to be my task. I said, I want to see muslins before we even cut fabric. I want to see muslins. So she said, oh, it'll be great. It'll just maybe a tweak here, a tweak there, but this is really good. And so the first muslin came out, train wreck. Second muslin came out, train wreck. It was train wreck after train wreck after train wreck after train wreck. And they finally went and got her. And so, there were the one question that stands out. There was one gal who had a princess line bodice with princess line from the shoulder. And there was no side dart, obviously, but the hem at the the princess panel did this. So I said, how did you arrive at that? And she said, well, someone said that you could just cut off the dart at the hem instead of pivoting it out so it goes in. And I
Mm.
said, no. And what she had done is she just got a bunch of books and started reading, and she started cobbling together this system. And so, really, what happened was for 6 days, I debugged her software. And I said to her at the time, if you had asked me, I would say, learn one system. And then you can look at other systems and evaluate what parts of it you might want to use and which you don't care to use. So same with like any kind of construction. It's good to learn a lot of different things, and then you put them to the test and you decide, okay, for my particular purposes, these bits of information work, these over here not so much. So I admire that you're like kind of going through all the different systems, but kind of, I'm just thinking, wow, that would make my brain freeze. But good
Well,
for
it definitely gives me lots to think about, and it has made me second guess my fabric choices. And but it's actually a lot of it is just reinforcing what you're teaching us, especially with the interfacing. If you're trying to make a jacket with fusible interfacing, it really does seem to matter getting it attached properly if you want to end up with a wearable jacket. So
yes. Well,
anyway, it has made me think I'm not going to use my boucle right out of the block. I'm going to use something easier to
well,
make my first jacket.
I'm kind of a believer in, if you're kind of trying some new techniques, you try them on kind of a burner fabric, something that,
Yeah.
it turns out right, then yay, you have something to wear. But if it doesn't turn out right, you just quietly give it to the Goodwill.
But I'll say that velveteen blazer is just a thing of beauty. That's a really nice blazer. Like
Yeah.
clearly you worked really hard. And it was great seeing the tender care you took with pressing, working with a really finicky fabric.
Well, I think one of the pressing tools that I talked about because it's been a while since we did that was like 2020. It was just before the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Mhm.
Mohair velvet
Yeah.
pressing. I may or may not, if I'll just go talk to everyone about mohair velvet here. If you like old sofas, old like theater seats, there's a particular kind of velvet that's really stiff and kind of prickly. And this is kind of what it looks like. Now, I just got an email or a text from Ann Steves at Gorgeous Fabrics, and she got in a bunch of what they sold her as velveteen. But she realized when she got it that it was mohair velvet. So, I hope she got a good price on it because this can be some money. So what I would say, if you want, because I think she's going to start making pressing surfaces with it. And if she does, everyone should have one. Mohair,
Yeah, that's a great idea.
it
Yeah.
really, because see, mohair velvet, where I learned about mohair velvet is I had a customer, this is some years ago, and actually the velvet cape is in Cool Couture. It was this big, like 16 yards of this wonderful velvet. And pressing the seams were like 42 inches long. Now, the little velvet board is about this wide, it's about this long, and it's way too expensive. And what I would end up doing is mashing the nap of the velvet on the edge of the board. Now, the other thing is there's what's called a needle board. And so I would say, because the needle board, if it's brand new, it's going to be fine. But when they've had a little bit of wear and those points wear down, it'll leave little dots on your velvet.
Mm,
So the needle board I use for pressing boucle, because
interesting.
boucle, you don't want to really smash it down. You
Well, exactly.
want
Yeah.
to get the iron where you need it so that you can flatten the seams, but you don't want to flatten the boucle. And so a needle board is an excellent surface for pressing boucle, but I would
Okay, good to
not
know.
press velvet with it. So, and so when I was doing this cape, I had this big piece of mohair velvet. I had done this project where I had these chairs upholstered. And so I had a piece that was like long enough and wide enough to fit my pressing table. I have a seam roll covered with it. I have a seam roll ham and mitt. And so you can, for not all that much money, you can get a nice piece of mohair velvet and you will not regret it. Anytime you're pressing anything that's napped, you just throw that down on your pressing table and press it, and it's going to serve you well. So
I collect German teddy bears, and some of them are made with mohair velvet and stuffed with sawdust. So I
yeah.
figured I might try using one of them as a pressing roll.
Well, you could use them as like a pressing ham.
Yeah, exactly.
But see this one, now this particular velvet, this velvet has a story. When I first in Oklahoma City, I found this very fabulous Art Deco sofa at the Salvation Army, and it was $20.
Okay,
And
well, there you go.
I sort of like hemmed and hawed. And at the time, I was living in my tiny little apartment, so I didn't have any place to put it. And the gal at the Salvation Army, she just leaned over and she said, "For $20, you'll find a place to put it." So my mom let me store it in her garage, and then when I moved to California, I brought it with me. And ultimately, I was able to afford to have it reupholstered. And that was what I called my one piece of grown up furniture because money was spent. It is now, when I moved here, of course, there was no room for a sofa. So it lived with my sister for a number of years until she moved into a new house. And she said, I have no room for it. And so I figured, okay, I don't have any room for it. I'm certainly not going to spend a bunch of money paying for climate control storage on this. So I said to her, in Oklahoma City, there's always one purveyor of Art Deco furniture. Just sell it for what you can get. And so she did, and I bought a bracelet at Tiffany. So
There you go. Yeah.
okay, so so we're going to be preparing the sleeves. We're also going to be constructing the lining. That's where we're going today. So any questions before we start the movie? Crickets? Okay, so again, as before, when I turn this on, call out your questions. But if you would turn off your cameras, that would give me a little more bandwidth so the computer doesn't get weird and janky. But let us begin. Okay, so here we are. And that's there. And we're off and running. When I construct, I like to build component pieces and then assemble those components into the final garment. This is the lining, and I like to start with the lining because for the little amount of time it takes to sew it together, it feels like you've actually made a garment. Also, after you've gone through all of the work to sew the jacket itself together, having to turn around and sew the lining in later is going to feel like a bore. So we sew the lining first. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. Here we have the lining body. This is the back panel, the side panel, the front panel. And what you want to do on all three of these hem pieces, you want to use the pinked rotary cutter blade to just knock the cut edge off, because sometimes this fabric is a good example. It has a tendency to fray, as you can see here. So cutting a pinked edge is going to help you manage these edges when you're actually installing this lining. So now let's look at the sleeves. And here are the sleeves. So really, I'm just going to show this. There's no mystery here. You don't trim off a lot. Again, make sure your cutter is perpendicular to the table. And if your cutter skips, you want to get a new rotary cutter blade. Okay, so just zoom in. So yes, you want to trim the seam allowances of the cuffs on the sleeves. Like we trimmed the hem on the main body pieces. Now, to prepare the sleeves for pinning, what I like to do is to come in, because these are inside curves here. And so I like to just come in, and you can do this both while they're laying on the table. Just give it a few snips, about 1/4 inch in from the cut edge. And these are probably 3 inches apart, these snips. And flip this over. This is going to make sewing these together and pressing the seam allowances open much easier. Next, pinning. As you can see, I have one of the sleeves with both seams pinned. Now this one here, I'm going to pin. I pinned the inside curve seam here. So now I'm just going to bring this out and bring this up and over. And I'm going to pin. Something to know, you don't have to pin one seam first and then the other. The order of pinning, not important here. Okay. We have these pinned. Next, pinning the bodies. On the lining back, we have inside curves here. This is the side seam. It's much easier to clip these before you actually stitch the center back seam together. And as before, you just want to clip 1/4 of an inch down past the cut edge before you start pinning. Now, just to give you a little direction here, this is the center back seam. So I'm going to go off camera and pin this and bring it back. Okay. Now I have the center back seam pinned. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and sew. So after the clipping, what you see here, this is the lining front and the lining side panel, front side panel. And I have pinned the seam on one so I could sew them. So I need to pin the other seam. So I will do just that. Okay, almost finished. And with this, we sew. There is no mystery there, so I will go to the machine and sew and meet you at the pressing table. Here we are at the pressing table. This is the lining back. This would be the center back seam. So the first thing we do is press as sewn. Now, this center back seam doesn't press open all the way up. Where the curve starts to bend, you're going to come here and you're going to make just a little snip. I'm just going to make that little notch there just so you can see it. Because what you're looking at here is that the seam will press open to here, and then all of this, which is the back pleat, when you install it, it presses to one side or the other, but we'll get to that when we can. So the easiest way to press is with a sleeve board. Put this on the seam roll. Now, for those who don't know what a seam roll is, this enables you to press seams flat without mashing the impression of the seam allowance into the surrounding fabric. It's the quickest and easiest way to do it. And so you notice we only press to here or to here. There we are. Press as sewn. and press this open. So that is body front to the body side on the lining. And now we're going to press the sleeve. Now I've made some clips here on the inside curve. And you press it as sewn. But what you can also do is stretch the raw edge. It makes pressing this open easier. So let me press this as sewn. And then once again, the sleeve board. So we can press all these seams open. Okay, and so the final is going to be pressing the cuff. So let me reset the camera for that. To finish, I like to press back seam allowances by about 1/4 inch. This is going to make it so that hand sewing this to the body, and we will hand sew this, it's going to be so much easier. Okay, so there we have those pressed under. So we have the initial lining construction finished. Back to the work table. So here we are back at the work table. This is the body of the lining. There are the sleeves. So our next step is to finish constructing the body. So here we go. Before we sew, like before, we want to clip the seam allowances on the inside curves on the body pieces and also on the lining. Oh, well, looks like I actually did that on the lining. So we have everything clipped. So what I want to do here, that way. So I'm going to pin the side seams and the shoulder seams, and I will bring back the results. Okay, I have pinned the shoulder seams and the side seams. I will go over to the machine, sew these seams, and press them open and bring you back the results. As you can see, we have the body sewn together. And one last little detail. You press up the cut edge at the hem allowance by about 1/4 inch. This is going to make things easier when you install the lining later. Now that we have the body situated, let's look at the sleeves. Now we need to ease the sleeve cap on the lining so we can install the sleeves into the lining. Now a little kind of a guide if you need to figure out where your easing stitches go. Let me just zoom out a little tiny bit. Okay. This is the front fold. This is the back fold if the sleeve is just sitting flat on the table. And so what I like to do is put a pin here and put a pin here. Because what that tells me is that I'm going to be sewing the machine basting along this area here, and that will distribute the ease over a little longer length of seam. Now we're going to go over to the machine to sew this stitching, but I just thought it would be useful to know where we begin, where we end. Reduce your upper tension. Now you can see here, I have changed the bobbin thread to white. This is going to be on the back of the fabric. It's going to help you to see what I'm doing with the sewing. So now that I've changed the upper tension, I have changed the bobbin thread to white. Now we're going to start at one of the pins and we're sewing at 1/2 inch. So it's 1/8 of an inch in from the cut edge. You want all of these stitches to occur in the seam allowance. The stitch length is the longest stitch on your machine. And we begin. So we get to the other pin. We turn the work 90 degrees and walk it at least one stitch. And then we turn it again. You're going to sew parallel. Now the object here, let me just tilt this down, make it a little wider. The object is you want the second row of stitching to be between this machine basting and the cut edge of the seam allowance. Okay, take the work out. So now we pick up the 2 threads from the needle. And we just want to tie them together. Once we tie them together, trim the threads. And let's look at the wrong side. The reason for loosening the tension is you see the loop of thread from the needle. It makes everything slide more easily on the white thread, which is what we're going to pull when we draw this up. So just a little preview. You grab these 2 and you just get it going. And it slides nicely. And I like to keep it between my finger and thumb. And so that is really an easy way to draw up the cap on your sleeve lining. So now let's go back to the work table and install these sleeves in the lining. This is a little trick that I know to do because I am slightly dyslexic and I will get things confused. Notice I have the lining right side out, laying flat like so. And this sleeve here, if you look at it, it bows this way, whereas this sleeve bows this way. So both sleeves angle towards the front. This is the front. This is how I tell which sleeve belongs on which side. Now, I'm going to pin the sleeves in and baste them, so I should get busy. As you can see here, I'm hand basting the sleeve into the body. Now, I like to hand baste because that way I know everything is in correctly. One little tip. I baste with the same color thread as in the machine. That way, if you don't want to take the basting out, you're not really compelled to, because I have a little saying, if it's in the lining, it does not exist. So let me continue on basting and I will come back with the results. Okay, almost finished. Okay. There we have it. Our next stop is the sewing machine. When sewing the sleeve to the body, I like to start and work along the underarm curve first, and then come around up and over the cap after. So what that looks like here is as you're working, try not to bunch up the fabric underneath. And so I'm going to stop for a moment and say that my machine doesn't sound like this in real life. It's just the microphone. Now I've got the underarm sewn. This is where I will sew up and over the cap. Now, this is why we have the sleeve against the bed of the machine. The feed dogs help ease the sleeve cap onto the body. Also, the advantage of the basting, you don't have to dodge around pins. You don't have to worry about the pins snagging your lining. It's just better. So for that extra little time it takes to hand baste, always a good investment. Okay, I think we're getting back towards the beginning. And here we are. Work out of the machine. Sorry about that. Like I said, I sew the underarm first and come up over the cap like so. Now, back to the work table. The final step, we want to clip the underarm curves. So we're going to stagger the clips. What that's going to look like, you don't want to cut them both at the same place. And the clips are about a 1/2 inch apart. You don't have to clip all the way to the stitching line. You just want to release that edge so that it will lay flat inside the jacket. Okay, so here we are. The clips are staggered. You stagger the clips because if you clip both at the same place, it's going to weaken the seam. So our construction on the lining is finished. Let's survey what we have achieved. So here we have the finished lining. As you can see, we pressed these edges up, these as well. you don't really finish the seam allowances in a lining because the lining itself is the seam finish for a garment. But this entire piece is ready to install into the jacket. So we will set this aside and we will continue. Okay, hang on. Close window. So questions. I see there are chat. Let me just open up the chat and see. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Nia. So questions. Hi, Rachel. Have the muslin for your dress right here. It's
Thank you so much.
well, it's ready when you're here. So, because I have you as a client, and I may have talked about this last week. Bob Kerry, former senator of Nebraska. I actually just saw him at the gym today, and so I have his jacket muslin, and I went to Beckenstein and chose swatches for him to choose from, and so yeah, because what I'm doing right now is kind of getting all my ducks in a row because I had the marketing on the book. We had a big meeting on that yesterday, and the gals who are marketing, much to my surprise and happiness, loved my husband's sketches. Loved. And
they're gorgeous.
Well, to the point where Jen, the gal who's running it, said, would you object if we put his name on the cover? I said, absolutely not. He did do them. And so he's gonna have on the back, he's gonna have I sent a headshot, and so he's probably, even as we speak, sitting at the computer, but because the thing was, I said, okay, honey, short, costume design, short. You don't have to, because he has this impressive resume, like short, but and so yeah, they're gonna be they're talking about a collector's edition of the book and a calendar and all this other stuff. So
very nice.
Very, very thrilled about that. So yeah, so that was yesterday, but it's like, okay, it's like you have to keep those projects rolling. So, it's like that is kind of where it's at right now. And so, knocking out the muslins, that was my job yesterday. So
I can't believe you got it done that fast. So yeah, so we need to talk about what's next.
Okay, but you have seen how fast I sew.
Oh, I know.
Actually, the laying out and cutting, because see, we're cutting two different sides on this, so that took the time. Getting the pattern, laying it out so that I know right from left and all of that. But the sewing was really, I mean, you've seen me sew. I knocked it together in about 20 minutes.
Oh, you're sketching.
It was all the setup that got me
to the time.
But yeah, so we'll talk. Yes.
Okay.
So questions? Any questions? Anybody? Is is this like that lazy Saturday, like where you have the or like in class when they had the film strip and everyone was glad of it because they turned the lights down and you could take a little nap? Okay, Catherine, I see you have a question.
Hey, good to see everyone on week 3. I was traveling week 1 and had food poisoning week 2. So
oh no,
happy to be here. Not many questions. I loved all the tips. And especially clipping those curves, even gentle curves, before we stitch. I've always clipped after.
Yeah.
Girl Scout sewing. But I did have a question. When you were clipping staggered around the arm's eye, is that all the way around or just in that ease area?
Just from because the ease is going to go up here. This is going to be underneath. So
so you're clipping the underarm.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, the thing about staggering the clips, this is something that you don't hear much about because there are times that people will just cut both at the same point on a seam. It weakens the seam. And also, especially if you're like on a front edge of a jacket, if there's a curve and you have to clip the little V-shape clips, they also need to be staggered because if you think about it, if you clip them at the same place, they create all these little spaces that when you press it, two things are going to happen. You're going to get little dimples where the fabric falls into those spaces. And also you're going to get corners where those little spaces are. But if you stagger the clips, it kind of fills everything in. And so you have a flatter surface that the fabric is not so likely to fall into those little spaces. And also the curve itself, when you press it, is going to press more smoothly. So that is why one would want to stagger clips.
And we would not trim that seam in a lining. Okay.
See, this is something my students are always shocked when I do tell them this. There was one time I was advising this young lady. She had this, it was some weird thing that happened. There was, the facing, and then there was a lining, and there was like some weirdness going over here. And she said that her critic, she was in the eighth semester, said she had to do it over. I said, no, you don't. What you do is you rip the lining out, move the lining over a little bit, sew it back down. If it's in a lining, it doesn't exist. And she said, you can do that? I said, if your critic spots it, I will fix it for you. And I never had to fix it. So if it's in a lining, it doesn't exist. That's why you can get away. If your fabric is particularly ravelly, you could pink those seam allowances just to make it a little easier to handle when you're constructing. But really, the lining is the seam finish. So you don't have to trim those seam allowances down because lining fabric isn't that thick. So you don't have to worry about the extra bulk. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, well, let us continue then. So we'll start the next video. And that's that. And so, yeah, so now we're preparing the sleeve. So, next week is when the heavy lifting begins. I'm just giving you a little warning here. So off we go. Our next component that we will be constructing are the sleeves. I like to have them finished and show you what we're going for so that you know where we're going. So we're going to be sewing the seams on the sleeves. We're going to be hemming the sleeves, and we're also going to be sewing the ease machine stitching so that the sleeves can install into the garment later. So it's not a lot of work, but let's just get busy anyway. To begin, as you can see, I'm pinning both seams on the sleeve, well, both sleeves actually, to prepare for stitching. Let's see here. Both sleeves are ready. I will meet you over at the sewing machine. When sewing a thick wool,
Kenneth,
yes, you can see here. Yes, go
I
ahead.
saw, okay. So I thought that there was easing on the longer, the seam that bows out.
Yeah.
This, you have to ease the bigger one into the smaller one.
Sometimes it depends on the cut of the sleeve. On this one, for me, I didn't have that extra. But yes, if you have, but especially if you're working on a boucle, what you would do is you would pin it so that the under sleeve is facing up, so that when you run it through the machine, the upper sleeve is against the feed dogs.
Right. But I've sometimes seen you and some of the other jackets, pressing the shorter seam, trying to straighten it out, just pressing on the seam allowance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, well, what I do on that is for the inside curve, the front seam. And
Yes.
because sometimes, depending on the pattern, sometimes they stretch the under sleeve at the elbow to match the outer sleeve on the front seam, to make it sit nicely. But
Right.
that's a case of, a case by case basis. Does your pattern have that? Does your pattern not have that? And
Yeah, but how do you know?
so how do you know is what you'll do is you can walk the seams and see.
Yes.
You just check the seam, and if they're both the same length, all good. What I also do, and you'll see it when we get to pressing, is I will, on the front seam, I will actually pull and stretch the raw edge of the seam allowances so that I don't necessarily have to clip.
Right. So you're going to do that after you
That's correct.
seam.
We'll sew it first, and then I'll stretch it And you know, a lot of times, if it's a loosely woven fabric, you don't really have to clip. So you notice I didn't really give any clips
Right.
to those seams before I actually pinned everything together. So on the body of this, on the body, as opposed to the lining really has no give, so you have to clip. But on the main fabric, if it has some give, it's considered preferable to actually stretch those edges rather than clipping.
Right. Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so other questions. Okay, so back to work. I have attached the walking foot. It makes everything so more smoothly. Also, it keeps the layers from shifting. Now, also something to know when sewing really all the body seams in a thick wool is to use longer stitch length. I'm using a 3.0 stitch. The general rule when you're sewing with fabrics is that the thickness of the fabric eats up stitch length. So you can sew with a standard 2.5 stitch, but what happens sometimes is you can develop a pucker. Okay. One seam down. Let's continue to the other seam. And I tend to sew these in the same direction. It's not absolutely necessary, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I noticed when you sewed the lining, you did top to bottom and bottom to top.
Yeah. It's a lining.
Okay.
So and so you know the directional sewing, I mean, you know, they're just kind of weird little things that I have figured out, and you know, they may not be based in any real fact. There are a lot of people who say everything you should sew all the seams top to bottom. What I found on something like a wool like this that's kind of stretchy, that if you're going to get any kind of give, you want to sew from top to bottom, whereas the lining is, it doesn't really have any stretch at all. So I find that I can just run that through the machine any old way.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, so other questions? Okay, back to work. Okay, we have finished the seams. Now, off to the pressing table. So here we are now at the pressing table. Now you can see here, we have an inside curve, but if you think back, I did not clip the seam allowances on the wool, just on the lining. This is because the wool is a little more malleable. So the object here, when you are pressing as sewn, is first, give it a good press like this. And what we want to do next is we want to stretch this edge here. And what that looks like is kind of have to sneak up on it. So we're going to start back here. And pull. You're going to be stretching the seam allowance in an opposing curve. Let me zoom in on that. So yeah, again, what we've done, you can do it again. It doesn't hurt. No such thing as stretching it too much. You want to stretch that seam allowance. So as you can see, it curves. So this edge is longer than the seam. This means that when you press it flat, it will, when you press it open, it will press flat. See, if you hold it like this, you can see the ripples. Let me just get it closer to the camera. that's what you want. You don't have to do it on the outside curve, because that's an outside curve, but on an inside curve, yes. So the outside curve, you just press everything as sewn. So then we're going to change the camera angle so we can press these seam allowances open. Now notice I'm using a different seam roll. This has wool flannel to cover the surface. I have different ones. I have a muslin covered for smooth fabrics. I have this one for wools. So what we want to do first is we want to put the sleeve like so, and then water. Doesn't hurt. Don't be shy about pressing wool, having a little spritzer bottle with some water. Extra water, extra moisture, extra heat. So now, when you're pressing, really lean into the press. Don't be shy about really putting your iron on the fabric. So now, if you notice, see how nice and flat that lays? That's what you want. Now let me flip this over. And again, okay, I'm going to put the water on the seam. Now, you want to make sure that the fabric cools. So don't be in a hurry to take this off of the seam roll. You can pat it down, and when it's comfortable for your hand to put onto the fabric, then you can remove it. Okay, so we're pressed back to the work table. Here we are back at the work table. So now there are a couple of things that we want to do in this next step. On the two seams as they intersect the armhole, you want to actually reduce the bulk. So what I like to do is about 1.25 inches down. You want to trim down the seam allowances to 1/4 inch. You don't want the entire full width of the seam allowance catching in the seam when you sew this into the body. So I call this preliminary bulk reduction. So I'm going to do the same trimming here. So this is one step. Then at the hem, and you can see here, see where the yellow line is, that's where the fold of the hem is. Now you don't want this thickness of seam allowance laying directly under this. So if you remember, we made little snips in the seam allowance. So you're going to come up here and trim again down to 1/4 inch. On both sides. what this is going to do, like I said, is it's going to eliminate any excess bulk on the inside of this cuff. It'll make it look nicer, and it's going to make it easier to wear. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. So then I'm going to thread it up a needle. And so I'm going to fold back right there, because that's where the hem allowance is going to fold. And you don't have to nail down the entire cut edge of the cuff onto the body. You just need to tack it at the seams. And this is just a loose tack. I call it a figure 8 tack. I guess that's a good reference. This is just a thread tack. There are other tacks, but since this is going to be in a lining, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. So there's one. Let me reknot the thread and we'll stitch the other seam. Here we are on the other side. Fold there. And then you can actually just turn these back as well. And see, since you have the interfacing on this side, it automatically wants to fold right where it needs to. So again, just another little tack. Now you notice I'm using bright orange thread. You could use any old thread you want. This is going to be inside a lining, but just for visibility purposes, this bright day glow orange is just the ticket. Okay. So what I'm going to do next, I'm just going to take this over to the pressing table after turning everything right side out and just give this a little bit of a steam. So I will return with the results. So here we are back from the pressing table, and you really just steam it, pat it. You don't have to put the iron down to make a solid crease. It just has to be a nice roll. So now that we've finished the cuff, we're going to come back up here, and I've already placed the pins just so you have them. If you remember when we were preparing the sleeves for the lining, we find the easing points the same way. To refresh, where the front and the back folds normally fall when it intersects the armhole, this is where we're going to sew our easing stitches. Now, when I go over to the machine, we're going to use essentially the same thing, but we're going to do it with a little bit of a twist. So this is Gutermann Mara 30. This is the thread that we will be winding onto a bobbin and putting that in the bobbin case for this next step. As we did for the lining, we're going to decrease the tension by about half for this operation. To begin, as you can see, I have turned the sleeve inside out so that the thread that's in your needle is going to show on the face of the fabric, and the Mara 30 will show on the back. So moving forward. So for those who are not familiar with the Mara 30 thread, this is a Gutermann thread. I use it for buttonholes, sewing buttons on, and a lot of times basting, tailor tacks and so forth. So that is the thread that we're using for this operation. What I like about it is that it's strong enough that you can really, really pull on it and you don't have to worry about it breaking. See here, the white thread is the Mara 30, and that is in the bobbin. The regular thread that you're going to be sewing with is in the needle. And so you're going to start at one of the pins, and you want to sew with the stitch length the longest that you can get. Longest you can get on your machine. And you're going to start at this pin, and we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch inside the seam allowance. So if this is a 5/8 inch seam, you would sew a 1/2 inch, and so forth. So when we get to here, I'm going to turn it, lock it at least 1 stitch. Then you want to sew parallel. You want midway between the machine stitching and the cut edge. So the second row of stitch travels between the two. This is going to make easing your sleeve cap so much smoother. Now, the thing about the Mara 30, especially on something like this fabric or heavier fabrics, especially if you're working on a coat, the Mara 30 is much stronger than any other thread that you would use for this. So this, I found, is my go-to technique when I'm easing a sleeve cap by machine. And just as a little comment, you don't, the needle was sewing a little with a little zigzag, which is not fatal, but I bumped the knob on the machine. So you would sew with the straight stitch when you're easing, just as a little aside here. We now want to tie off these 2 thread ends on the thread coming from the needle. And so just draw out a little bit and show you the results. So this is where it starts here. And it stops and turns around here. The beauty of this is that you don't have to worry about pulling these white threads out when you're gathering. They stay intact. So now let's go back to the work table and survey what we've accomplished. So here we have the sleeves prepared and ready to install into the jacket. So to recap, we sewed the seams. We did preliminary bulk reduction on these seam allowances there. We did a similar thing on the hem allowances, and we turned up the hems, secured them, and pressed them. Finally, we sewed the machine basting to prepare the sleeves so that we can ease these when we're ready to install them into the garment. So, on to the next piece. Okay. So, questions?
Kenneth, I just want you to say those are some good looking sleeves. Wow.
You know, it's a really good pattern. And that for Bob, it's whenever I think about this, like he's just the guy Bob at the gym, but he's like this, when I tell people Bob Carey, former senator, everyone knows who he is. It was like, I had no idea. But yeah, so I'm recycling that because I think I've probably told you this. I found this Saint Laurent jacket at the Salvation Army 100 years ago. And it's the pattern that makes me look like I've got shoulders and a waist, which is a good thing because I'm kind of built like a hot water heater. And so when he came over, he's taller than I am, but we have a similar build. And so I just pulled that one off the rack and said, here, Bob, try this one on. And, it was a little short in the arms, a little short on the length, but, that's easy enough to fix. So, it's a good pattern. So, I remember one time I had a student who was wanting to, she was for her senior collection, and she also was going to make this for her boyfriend. She wanted to make him a jacket. So she wanted me to, she said, do I have any information on how to draft a men's jacket? I said, okay, well, I'm going to ask you a question. She said, yeah. I said, does your boyfriend have a jacket that he likes the fit of? And she said, yeah. And I said, there you go. And she was kind of horrified. I said, you don't have to start from scratch all the time. If you know it fits and you know he likes it, you can get the pattern from it. And then you can go off and you can have interesting lapels or do whatever you want with it. But why would you burn through a lot of time to develop the jacket pattern and then do the designing? So, some people would say I'm cheating, but I don't care. Because when you look at any of these jackets, is the first thing you think, oh, that looks like a Saint Laurent jacket? Because there are certain things. A 3-panel jacket with the 2-part sleeve is kind of a classic thing. There are zillions of different iterations of them out there. And so for me, I have used different ones over the years, but this one, for what shape I'm in right now, is just the ticket. So thank you for the compliment on the sleeves. But I feel I should share it with Saint Laurent because that's where the pattern came from. Okay, so other questions? Yes, go ahead, Holly.
I have a question. This is not to the video that you just showed us, but as far as the weft interfacing that you had sent us to, is that interfacing, does that make it dry clean only? Can it still be laundered?
See, none of these, I don't make anything that you can wash.
Yeah, okay. That was mine because it wasn't specifically on the website. So I just want to make sure because that was my guess. And then the second thing is on the website that we were linked to for that weft interfacing, they actually have shoulder pads.
Okay.
So I'm just going to throw the link to that in the chat. Can you guide us to which one of these would be the most appropriate? There's quite a few options.
Okay, so let me click on that.
Okay.
So if I look like I'm disappeared for a moment, it's my browser is opening up.
Okay.
So but you can all still hear me. Let's see. Come on, open up. Come on. Okay, let's see. There's the medium covered. The 8-ply needle punch pad.
Okay.
That one. Or you could do the ladies 12-ply shoulder pad.
Okay.
So, and I'm what I like about, hang on, what I like about, no, cancel. Let me just quit my browser for a moment. What I like about the needle punch pads is you can calibrate how thick that pad is. And so like going back to Bob, one shoulder is lower, the other shoulder is higher. So what we'll probably experiment with in the muslin is taking a couple or 3 of those layers of the shoulder pad out on this side so that we create something that's a little more level. So it's easier to calibrate thickness of a pad if you have the needle punch pads that are done with, I think it's like 1/8-inch polyester batting.
Okay.
That's why I like those. And they have a really good firm, it's a good solid foundation for a jacket.
Thank you.
Okay, so other questions? Crickets. So is anyone doing anything fun for the rest of the weekend? Woohoo, boy.
We're supposed to get a nor'easter tomorrow, so everyone's panicking about wind and rain, and so
Oh, damn.
good excuse to sew though.
Well, you see that, nothing like if it's pounding down rain or if it's like lightning and thunder and all of that, for me, it's like, it just,
Exactly.
yeah, because when I was a kid, my mother used to, in the summertime, she always wanted us to go outside. Basically, she wanted us out of her hair, which I understand as an adult. But during like the rain, both my sisters were, I'm bored, whatever. But I was always in my room making things, because she wouldn't, if it was sunny, get outside. But if we couldn't go outside, I was no trouble to her because I would just lock myself in my bedroom and I would make things. So, inclement weather is always puts me always in a good mood because that means I can sew.
It's Thanksgiving weekend here in Canada
Oh,
this
really?
weekend, so it's a
Oh my
holiday
goodness.
weekend here.
So imagine
So
it's kind of quiet.
yeah, well, exactly, and it's lots of extra time for me to kick back and sew. I don't have to worry about anything else going on.
So do you make turkey and all of that?
Oh yeah, yeah, it's turkey and it's pretty much the only big difference I guess is because in the US it's the football, right? You guys are big into the Thanksgiving football.
Yeah.
Here we still do it sort of a traditional Thanksgiving. It is more sort of celebrating the fall harvest and that kind of thing. But yes, turkey and all the fixins and family getting together and all that kind of stuff. And for our family, it's closing up the cottage because we have a cottage that's needs to be winterized, and so the boats get picked up and winterized, and the plumbing gets turned off and things like that. So it's kind of a busy weekend, and we really enjoy the fall colors
Mhm.
at this time of year. We're up here in maple syrup country, and so it's nice to see the maple trees, depending on the kind of summer that we had, whether it was hot, cold, rainy, and that kind of thing sort of determines the kind of color we're going to get. You get some of that in New York if you left the city. It
We
good
have
fall
trees
in the
in New
state.
York. We have Central Park.
Yeah,
Really
well,
do.
true. Yeah, true.
So, and I have Union Square is just a block away. So, you can see the tops of the trees are starting to turn. So it's going to be, it's coming soon. So,
Well, and once we get the frosty nights, which are happening, because your weather's pretty much the same as ours here. We're about 8 hour drive apart.
mm,
And once we get the frosty nights, then the color really starts coming on fast. So.
well, I'm looking forward to it. As far as Thanksgiving, I've only made one Thanksgiving turkey in my life, and it had a chest wound.
Oh.
And this is, my first husband, he was pretty, he wasn't very bright. And so,
Sometimes those are the best ones.
no, actually,
Absolutely.
one of those, it should have been like a summer romance, but I was young and stupid and I was thinking not with this head. And so, but anyway, I eventually wised up. But there was one Thanksgiving that we were going to have his family in from, he had a sister and her husband who lived in Livermore, and his brother and then brother-in-law, now sister-in-law, long story, were in Los Angeles. So they were all going to come and I was going to fix a turkey. And so, went out to the grocery store. We went out and got all the fixings and the big turkey and the whole bit. And we got home and there were the blinking light on the answering machine and there were two messages. And so basically both parties canceled. So we had all of this food. And I was quite annoyed by this because it was like, it wasn't money I had. I
All
was
right.
doing it, and it's like, damn. So I just said to him, you go put all this stuff away. And I called a friend of mine and I was complaining about these nitwits who canceled on us. And from the kitchen, I heard, and I said, I've got to go. He's up to something and it sounds like it involves the power saw. And he was attempting to saw the frozen turkey in half with my power saw.
Oh, keepers, creepers.
And I came in and I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I thought we would freeze half and cook half. I said, okay, I don't know that much about cooking because I don't. I know that you can cook the whole thing and then freeze what you don't eat.
Right.
So my one and only turkey that I ever made had this big,
Okay. Yeah, that's a story.
Yeah, bless his heart. Yeah, God love him. He's Um, and this is because see, the brother and brother-in-law after he and I split up in 87, like 1990, it was Jim was the brother, James is the brother-in-law. And I always referred to James as my sister-in-law because he was kind of a big girl. So they called one time and they were like, okay, we have something really have to tell you, and they were kind of winding up. And I said, just out with it. What is going on? And so they said, James is going to become Jana. I said, okay.
My
they were like,
my
are you, they were expecting I was going to freak out or something. And I was like, no, I totally get it. And so then like all the other members of the family had to call and weigh in on all this thing. And I said to every last one, you know what? We're all divorced. You're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced. Those two have been together for 28 years and counting. And so I think what we just need to do is just wish them well and keep our nose out of their business.
mm,
And so when I was in Los Angeles in August, because they live in Los Angeles, we had lunch and we hadn't seen each other in forever, but it was fun. And they of course always ask me, do you want to know what Matthew's up to? And I always say no, and they tell me anyway. And so apparently he's living with a woman in Idaho, and he takes a lot of camping trips. And I said, that sounds very Brokeback Mountain to me. And so he also writes angry screeds critiquing the Catholic Church that he publishes online. And I just couldn't resist it. I leaned in and I said, because he can't get a book contract like I can.
dear.
Yeah. So, he's far, far away, and that's a good thing. But yes, that was my one and only Thanksgiving turkey. I'm that guy now. I just play dumb. What's that thing over there that the food comes out of? That's the stove. So I'm the guy that brings the bread. I'm the guy who brings the ice. I'll go and order the pumpkin pie, but they know, just don't even expect. Now, see, I'm the guy that will wash the dishes. Beforehand, I'm the one who can do the chopping because I'm good at that. And I'll wash the dishes and all of that. But as far as gathering the meal, preparing the meal, people just know I'm useless.
Our Thanksgiving, I have 3 kids. They've had my Thanksgivings, and now they're very happy to say my mother orders great Thanksgiving. We back the car up, and they load it into the back of the car, and that's it. So
this is something I tell my students at FIT: youth has beauty, age has money. There are certain things that, like, I don't do my own laundry. I don't cook. I don't have to. The thing is, just, make it so that you don't have to do that. So if you do it, it's because you want to, not because you have to.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
There's
So
a place for all of it. There's
Yeah.
a place for all of those techniques. And I appreciate the person who can wash my dishes, who can put my stuff away after slaving for hours. And I don't know why I decided to do that, but I'm glad there are people who are willing to help.
and that makes me happy, because then I feel like I'm contributing something.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I can clean your kitchen. I can scrub all those pots and pans.
Thank God.
Okay. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So other questions before we
I have a question.
go ahead.
Be off topic and maybe you can't answer it. All right.
Go
So
ahead.
I was just in Italy, and in a Dolce and Gabbana store, they were selling these, winter they were jackets, just like what we're making. But I went in and I touched it, and the wool was so thin, but it wasn't like one of those 100s, the 120s.
Yeah.
So, but it was lightweight. So I just wanted to ask you. So of course, that's now my quest to find a fabric that's thin, but that's going to sew, that's not temperamental, that's not slippery.
Yeah.
So do you what kind of, sometimes they give you the weight, weight per square yard, or
I know what you're talking about, the grams per square inch or some.
yeah.
I don't know. I honestly don't, because I go by the.
Yeah, I know. So now I have to go on my hunt.
I would say,
personally.
so what I would say is, next time you're in the city, go into Beckenstein's. Have you ever been? Beckenstein's?
No.
Yeah, let me just type it into the.
And while you're doing that, the other place that's great for these is a fabric place in Baltimore. They sell these gorgeous Zegna wools and things like that. They're pricey.
Yeah, how do I know that, you always cringe at the 100s and the 150s because
it's like
it's slippery. So, but But there are thin wools that are easier to handle. But how do I identify them? That's what my problem is.
I wish I could give you some word to ask for. But again, I'm spoiled because I'm here.
I would go, I would look at it. I mean, I would go, and if it says anything about a 100 or a thing, I run away from it, right? So I'm trying to look for something that's
okay. I'm gonna temper my remarks on the Super 100s and Super 200s and all of it.
All right.
Is there are some that are like a Super 100 weight that there is a weave called hop sack.
Okay.
It's a plain weave.
Right.
You want to look for something that is more of a matte finish rather than a shiny finish.
Right.
And so you could say, I'm looking for something like that, like a Super 100 weight, but I want a hop sack, or I want something with a matte finish. Right. That might be, this is some language that you could use to kind of get them in the direction.
I mean, I took a picture of the jacket that I just adore. But you can't tell the weight or anything about the fabric except that it's a plaid,
And see, what I would venture a guess to is this. See, years ago, my friend Linda Maynard and I almost got thrown out of the Jill Sander boutique in San Francisco because they had just opened in San Francisco, and they had this article in Vanity Fair that was, they had this salesperson from the New York store saying, well, our jacket is better because the seam on the inside is sewn differently, and that justifies that extra 6. And I'm like, what do you mean it's sewn differently? Are you using thread spun from Queen Elizabeth's leg hair? I mean, how is it different? And so Linda and I went to we wanted to see, they were like, oh no, man-made fibers for us. That was a bunch of crock. We were in there, and it's like, I can feel fusible in here. I can feel a sponge rubber shoulder pad, which is a kiss of death. And they almost threw us out because we were just having a great time. And we were looking at these prices. These are couture prices. And this stuff is not that well made, ready to wear.
Right.
And so I venture a guess that Dolce & Gabbana probably uses the same houses to manufacture as Jill Sander does. Yeah. And so my sense is it's probably a thin fabric, but there has to be something underneath it.
Oh, probably there's a fusible in there. And it had a really nice, silk lining, and the silk lining, that fabric was also very thin. I'm just like on a quest for a lightweight jacket. I had hopes. I thought I bought a lightweight wool, but then when I fused it, I said, this is going to be another heavy jacket.
Well, now there's another fusible that she has at Gorgeous Fabrics. I think she calls it a whisper weight.
Okay.
It's like chiffon.
Yeah, but then it just slipping on. That's why I didn't want to have it.
But save my ass with Doll Couture, but I've used it in garments, and it's a little harder to manage when you're fusing it down, but it stabilizes the fabric, but it doesn't add any weight, and the fabric still has quite the same drape as it starts out with. So it's just something to know about. So when you're thinking what kind of fusible do I use for this or that, I would put that in your fusible vocabulary.
All right.
I completely agree. That's gorgeous stuff.
Yeah.
Can I also go back to mohair velvet?
Yeah.
Some places also have wool velvet, which is different. It's not the goat fur one. You really need
that really prickly, and actually contact Gorgeous Fabrics. She's in Paris right now. She won't be back till the 21st. But just say, Kenneth said, and she's on. Video.
She's in the course.
Yeah.
I looked at the website. She has pieces that are 18 by 27 inches.
That's good. Yeah, that's a nice size. Yeah, well worth the money.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so other questions? Okay, then. Well, I think we're finished. So the drill. Oh, Vicki, are you waving?
No, I'm just waving.
Okay,
prematurely.
So let's turn off the recording there. Stop the recording. Stop the recording, please.